Good morning. I'd like to start this keynote lecture by thanking the organizers of the International Industrial Chemistry Conference, IICC21, for giving me this opportunity of delivering this keynote lecture, which will be briefly covering some of the research activities carried out at our research group in the last 5 years, and will review the main findings in our works on syngas production by methane catalytic partial oxidation and by biogas reforming. So, as you know, there may be some unconventional methane sources that nowadays cannot be fully exploited, and the only alternative left for them is flaring of the gas in order not to release it into the atmosphere in an unburnt manner. The thing is that if we have a look at the numbers, the natural gas production has been increasing over the years, and you can see that worldwide natural gas production is very important in many countries. And let me bring your attention to the neighboring countries of Pakistan, in which natural gas exploitation is significant, and that means that probably there are opportunities for exploiting this resource also in your country in the future. So if we have a look at the numbers, the natural gas production has increased at a steady pace in the last decade, and definitely the discovering of new unconventional gas wells, and particularly shale or stranded gas, has led to an increase in the exploitation in recent years, and particularly production has been increased by 25% in the last decade. And since this gas can be serving as a bridge fuel in the transition from a fossil fuel based economy to a renewable based economy, this can help contributing to the transition and also to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. So it's very interesting, but sometimes this valuable resource may not be easy to exploit, and particularly in some remote areas, or for example offshore applications in oil platforms located in the sea, in deep offshore waters, can be leading to the need for looking for new ways for valorization of this resource. Other methane sources that can be looked at are, for example, biogas delivered from anaerobic digestion processes of different sorts of organic wastes, and particularly municipal solid wastes from the recollection of this type of urban wastes, and also from the sewage sludge that is generated in wastewater treatment plants. And this biogas is a gas mixture composed of mainly methane and carbon dioxide in proportions that may vary depending on the conditions. But the truth is that if we look at the numbers, you can see that also biogas has been steadily increasing in the last years worldwide as a result of a new implementation of different anaerobic digestion plants for treating these valuable wastes. And particularly, biogas has been considered for the production of heat and electricity in a straightforward use of this resource, but also some applications consider the enrichment of this biogas in the methane content, and delivering what is known as biomethane that can be used as fuel or injected into the natural gas grid. But again, depending on the circumstances, this upgrading to biomethane may not be possible. So there are new proposals that could be serving for valorizing this material. Now, if we have a look at the different routes for producing synthesis gas, which is a mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen according to different proportions of hydrogen to CO, we can distinguish different technologies. Some of them are already implemented at an industrial scale, such as, for example, steam reforming of natural gas, which is the main alternative for producing hydrogen that is required in the synthesis of ammonia for the fertilizers industry. But also we can have a look at other alternatives, such as catalytic partial oxidation, which is a mildly exothermic reaction that can provide heat for the process. But the most important feature is the hydrogen to CO ratio of 2 that is produced in this technology, which can serve for the production of synthetic fuels via the Fischer-Tropsch synthesis in industrial applications. And it can benefit from other possibilities such as the decentralized production and other possibilities that will be discussed more in depth in the following slides. As for biogas, as we already mentioned, biomethane is nowadays one of the main alternatives, but it can also represent some challenges in terms of its exploitation. And another possibility that could be proposed is the production of synthesis gas via different reactions, particularly steam reforming and dry reforming have been usually explored, but also depending on the way that the biogas is obtained and sometimes depending on the circumstances, combined reforming strategies, including the addition of a little amount of oxygen, what could be known as oxy-CO2 reforming, can be leading to the production of synthesis gas in proportions of hydrogen and methane that could be suitable for the development of gas-to-liquid technologies. This will require of the development of suitable catalysts for the process that will lower the energy requirements and may make this possibility economically and technically viable. So definitely the production of syngas as raw material is the key to develop gas-to-liquid technologies. We can see that from syngas there are different possibilities that can be considered from the industrial standpoint, and mainly the useful applications that can be discussed nowadays are basically Fischer-Tropsch synthesis for the production of synthetic gasolines and other hydrocarbons of chemical relevance, but also methanol that can serve for a variety of materials and applications. So different raw materials can be used for the production of synthesis gas, and particularly methane from these unconventional resources or from biogas can also serve for this purpose. So there's a steady increase in global energy demand that has increased the interest in gas-to-liquid technologies and their development. Synfuels can contribute to this, meeting this need. There are large volumes of stranded natural gas in remote areas, and GTL technologies may be the only alternative to liquefied natural gas for monetizing these reserves. These synfuels are cleaner because they are free of sulfur and aromatic hydrocarbons in comparison to other fossil-derived resources. Processing capacity can be easily increased by installing additional modular units and benefiting from the economy of scale in small-scale applications. They reduce the need for flaring of these resources that sometimes are not easy to exploit. So definitely the main conclusion is that the smaller economies of scale make gas to liquid technologies more economical, especially in remote spots, and small-scale processing can be easily assembled on-site from prefabricated modules. To develop these type of technologies, it's important to conduct process intensification, and particularly the development of structured catalytic reactors can help in this transition to implement GTL technologies at small scale. You can see that there are some disadvantages from the conventional GTL technologies at large scale, including the plant costs, the economics that are dictated by the scale, the natural gas prices, and the liquid fuels prices, and it's not viable for offshore applications. Whereas structured catalytic reactors can help overcome these limitations because of their advantages, including the reduced size, the compact size that reduces significantly the investment costs. And also it's possible to implement these type of technologies in isolated or remote areas or oil fields with small capacity. So it can be easily adapted to many different applications, whether they are onshore, offshore, or even we could consider mobile applications. So these processes benefit from the compact design and small footprint, which enable the development of new applications and technologies, as we already discussed before, but also from the characteristics of this type of reactors. They can allow for a very easy thermal integration. Coupling of endothermic and exothermic reactions is feasible with a suitable design of the microreactor, which increases the energy efficiency. They also improve heat and mass transfer rates, allowing the reaction to enter in the kinetic regime, and also derived from this consequence, it's the facilitation of the full potential of very active catalysts in this type of devices, and also lowering significantly the contact times, and thus benefiting from a better utilization of the chemical reactor. So these characteristics are highlighted in this slide. You can see that the high rates of heat and mass transfer can be achieved in this type of designs, reduced mixing times, higher production capacity in very compact designs. They facilitate the thermal integration. They could allow for the decentralized production of fuels, and even portable applications can be conceived. And of course, in some applications, such as for example in partial oxidation of methane, where oxygen may be required and can be dangerous from the safety point of view, they can also enable a higher safety operation. I will now go on to some of the main results obtained as a result of different research activities carried out at our group over the years. These research activities were framed in the context of different research projects with funding at the national and regional schemes, but hopefully we will be also collaborating in the future in other international projects and initiatives, and we are open for collaborations in this sense. One of the main international collaborations and the main highlight of our research can be focused on this application in this patent that was licensed to Petrobras, which was a method for preparing structured catalytic systems. And as you can see, this was published in 2012, and as we know, Petrobras will be exploiting this technology. So this is a joint project that was developed for exploiting these methane streams that can be in offshore platforms in the sea, so that they could obtain a very easy and compact design, robust design for producing synthesis gas from methane. And the key here was thermal integration, so by combining methane combustion in some of the channels in a cross-contour flow against the production of methane steam reforming, which is a highly endothermal reaction, the energy integration can be achieved and produce syngas without the need for external heat sources. And of course, to develop these type of technologies, we have to look at the different possibilities for the catalytic development. And in dry reforming processes, particularly nickel catalysts are usually proposed in the literature because of their low cost and high reforming activity, but they suffer from deactivation by coke, and they are easily reoxidized in the presence of oxygen-rich atmospheres. So, for example, for catalytic partial oxidation of methane or for oxy-CO2 reforming processes, this may not be a suitable alternative, and particularly deactivation by carbon deposits must be avoided as much as possible in order to develop a very efficient industrial application. So there were different alternatives that could be considered, and we selected at our group two main alternatives, which were cobalt, which is also a transition metal that is counting on a relatively low cost in comparison to noble metals, and also presenting very interesting features in terms of high reforming activity and also being more resistant to carbon deposition. So another alternative, of course, is the use of noble metal catalysts. In particular, focus was put on rhodium because it has very high reforming activity, does not suffer oxidation under this type of oxygen-rich atmospheres and presents high selectivity to synthesis gas. So, as we know, the cost of rhodium may be prohibitive if the catalyst design is not adequately carried out. So, one of the main activities is to develop suitable catalysts that can be viable, and in this sense, if we combine a rational design of the catalyst with the structuring of the reactors, of the catalytic reactors, it may be possible to come with competitive catalysts that will be suitable for these type of technologies. So some of the first things that we need to do in our research activity is to observe how the catalyst works in order to develop and design an efficient chemical reactor. And to do so, we need to combine different types of studies, and particularly we conducted for catalytic partial oxidation of methane a kinetic study combined with computational fluid dynamics to simulate the behavior of this type of reaction system in a microchannel reactor composed of a catalytic layer and the frame of metal that is the skeleton of this microchannel reactor. So we conducted a series of kinetic analysis for the reaction using a rhodium supported on alumina catalyst. Then the CFD model was used for implementing the kinetics developed in the kinetic study and to perform simulations or analyzing different operating variables. And finally, we conducted a more realistic study with non-isothermal conditions and considering cooling with air for management of the heat released in the reaction. So the kinetic study involved the different reactions that are typically considered in the literature, but focused was put on four main reactions, which were a combination of combustion, steam reforming, reverse water gas shift, and hydrogen oxidation. For these reactions, different chemical reaction rate equations were tested, and finally these were the main results that were obtained by conducting experimental testing and under the integral method of analysis of the kinetic data, and by combining this with the use of a direct search algorithm in which the objective function was trying to minimize the error between the values obtained in the modeling with the parameters estimated and the experimental values obtained in the kinetic experiments. And these were the values that were obtained for the activation energy and the kinetic intrinsic constant. And we can see that if we compare these values from the kinetic equations proposed and the experimental values, we obtain very good fitting of the experimental results at different conditions for the oxygen to methane fed in the ratio, fed in the feeding stream, and also the hydrogen and CO yields were very well modeled and predicted by the kinetic model developed. This was further implemented in a CFD model, and we can see that the simulations were difficult to implement at the scale of the reactor design, and we are still working on this, and to do so we have a PhD student that will be carrying out more in-depth simulations of the whole system. So for the first approach, only a single channel was considered, and there were different simulations that were carried out. Also, we developed some cobalt-based catalysts for this process, which were tested in powder form before the structuring process, which has difficulty in optimizing the formulation that is needed for doing the deposit of the catalytic layer onto the inner walls of the structured reactors. So we learned from these studies that it's crucial to preserve the cobalt metallic function in order to avoid light off of the reaction and the activation by full reoxidation. And this can be attained if we maintain an elevated degree of surface dispersion of the cobalt species by a careful choice of these main features: the cobalt loading, support nature, and the calcination and activation conditions. Also, we tested this type of catalysts in other applications, such as thin reforming of oxygenates. We could see that upon reuse and regeneration, this catalyst could maintain its activity in a combined total time of 20 hours of stream. Syngas production can be effectively attained in hydrogen to CO molar ratios that can be suitable for GTL technologies. Then we moved on to the biogas reforming and partial oxidation of this biogas, and developed a series of rhodium catalysts that were tested, and we could find that the catalysts were active and quite stable, with hydrogen to CO ratios around the expected ratio of 1, that is in dry reforming. But the problem is that we need to carefully select the deposit and stabilization of the active phase in order to deliver very good and active catalysts. Otherwise, the conversion of the biogas and the yields to the syngas products may be lowered. And in particular, we saw that these materials, rhodium-based catalysts, may be very good in the performance under oxy-CO2 reforming conditions, because they increase methane conversion, they maintain the hydrogen yield at very similar values, but they also contribute to significantly reduce the carbon deposits. So then we optimize also the feeding of oxygen in the biogas stream, and we observed that the best performance was obtained with this oxygen to methane of 0.12, increasing the stability of the catalyst and methane conversion, and maintaining also reasonable CO2 conversion levels, very high. And we can see that the input of a small amount of oxygen contributed to increase the syngas yields, and the hydrogen to CO ratio could also be increased a little bit, which was desirable from the point of view of its further implementation in Fischer-Tropsch technologies. We also consider that this is a very promising candidate for the structuring process, for the development of structural catalytic reactors. As we can see here, we could maintain very similar levels of conversion of methane in comparison to previous studies in the literature, but also at much higher space velocities. And it is considered that if this is obtained in the catalytic tests in powder form, in the structuring processes in which spatial velocities can be significantly increased, this could also be obtained, and this is something that we are nowadays working on. So definitely we observe that the metal dispersion is crucial. We learned that over the time that if we prepare very good and highly dispersed rhodium catalysts, we can contribute to very good performance of the biogas reforming. And as main conclusions, small-scale GTL technologies can be a good alternative for valorizing methane, benefiting from the increase in methane sources such as stranded gas and biogas. New technologies can be developed to exploit these resources by syngas production. Process intensification by means of the development of structured catalytic reactors can contribute to the successful development of these small-scale GTL technologies. Structured catalytic reactors can be successfully developed by a combination of multidisciplinary studies: catalyst development, testing and screening, kinetic modeling, and computational fluid dynamic simulations. Cobalt-based catalysts are promising in the catalytic partial oxidation of methane, and rhodium catalysts are promising for the dry reforming and partial oxidation of biogas. I would also like to bring your attention to this special issue in which I am serving as guest editor together with my colleague Panayotis Kechagriopoulos from the University of Aberdeen, which is Catalysis in Syngas, in the journal Catalysts. And I would like to finish my talk by thanking the different funding organisms for the financial support of this work, including the University and the Banco Santander, and also the Spanish Ministries for Economy and Science, Innovation and Universities. Also, the different persons that contributed to this slides and to this content presented and the studies developed over these years. And finally, I would like to thank you for your attention.